His ex-boyfriend, Ethan, was back in the country. He found Jax, telling him a truth that reshaped the past. He explained that Caleb had pursued him back in college, even arranging the very study abroad program that had been the catalyst for their breakup. After Jax and Ethan had split, Caleb had lost all interest. Ethan said it was only upon returning to the States that he realized they had gotten together. From the very beginning, it had always been Jax that Caleb wanted. The revelation was stunning. The lengths Caleb had gone to, the sheer Machiavellian nature of his pursuit, were breathtaking. Back in college, they had been roommates. For reasons Jax couldn't fathom at the time, Caleb was incredibly tactile, always finding an excuse for physical contact. One night, Caleb climbed into his bed, claiming his own comforter was soaked. Jax had rolled his eyes. It was a classic Caleb move, the heir to a New York real estate empire deciding to wash his own luxury-down comforter, only to overload and break the dorm's machine. The comforter was still dripping on their small balcony. Jax had pointed out that their other two roommates were home for the holidays, their beds empty. But Caleb had refused, complaining that he hated the smell of their pheromones. Jax, sighing, had shifted over, granting him half the mattress. Like a puppy, Caleb had immediately burrowed close, inhaling near Jax's scent gland. He had murmured about the contrast, how Jax looked so tough and cool, yet his pheromone signature was fresh peaches. He confessed that he liked it. Jax had warned him to back off. They were both alphas. Proximity to another alpha's pheromones was supposed to trigger aggression, not affection. He told Caleb that his scent, a sharp whiskey on the rocks, made him want to kick him out of bed. Caleb had only laughed, wrapping his arms around Jax in a playful grapple, declaring he wanted to be Jax's best friend in the entire world. Jax, unable to fight his ridiculous persistence, had given up and scrolled through his phone, looking at his last conversation with Ethan. For the past month, the chat log was a monument to his own efforts. He initiated every conversation, only to receive terse, dismissive replies. They were both in New York for college, Jax in the village and Ethan uptown, but every time Jax suggested meeting, Ethan claimed to be swamped with lab work. He wondered if his boyfriend truly couldn't spare a single hour for dinner. As if summoned by his thoughts, a message from Ethan appeared. He needed to talk. He was going abroad to study. When Jax asked when, Ethan replied it would be that Friday. The realization hit Jax like a physical blow. All the arrangements had been made behind his back. Ethan's final message was a clumsy apology, followed by the news that he'd fallen for someone else and they should break up. It was a clean, brutal amputation of their relationship. Jax covered his eyes with his arm, but tears still managed to escape, hot and shameful. Caleb's voice was soft beside him. He told Jax that Ethan wasn't worth the grief, that he deserved better. Jax's voice was thick when he said Ethan had been his first love, the first Omega he'd ever wanted. The emotional turmoil caused his peach-scented pheromones to flood the room, sharp with aggression. Instinctively, Caleb's own whiskey scent flared in response, a powerful S-class alpha signature meeting his own in a tense standoff. Just as Jax felt the urge to throw a punch, Caleb surged forward and captured his mouth in a kiss. It deepened quickly, his hands roaming, exploring Jax's body with an undisguised hunger. It took several disoriented moments for Jax to begin resisting. He bit Caleb's lip, hard, and shoved him away, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He demanded to know if Caleb was insane. They were both alphas. Caleb's breathing was ragged, a satisfied, predatory gleam in his eyes. A trickle of blood stained his smile as he said he liked Jax's fire, that it was exhilarating. Jax told him to get out. He couldn't handle an alpha-alpha relationship. He certainly couldn't share a bed with him anymore. Reeling from the dual shock of the breakup and the forced kiss, Jax escaped to a bar. He ordered a variety of drinks, but everything he tasted seemed to carry the ghost of Caleb's whiskey pheromones. He was toxic, and Omega slid onto the stool next to him, offering to keep him company. This was what he was supposed to want. Someone soft and yielding, not an alpha like Caleb who was taller, broader, and harder in every way. Jax introduced himself. The Omega, Andy, offered to pour him another drink. Jax, already half-drunk and emotionally frayed, didn't notice the pill Andy dropped into the glass. After finishing the drink, a corrupting heat spread through his body. His scent glands burned. He realized what had happened, his voice turning to ice as he asked what Andy had done. Andy admitted his goal, to harvest Jax's gland. An S-class alpha gland could fetch at least $500,000 on the black market. The drug was designed to force him into a rut, making the extraction easier. The poison left him weak, his limbs like lead, unable to summon his defensive pheromones. Two other alphas appeared, ready to drag him away. Suddenly, Caleb was there. He smashed a bottle over Andy's head without hesitation. His bodyguards quickly subdued the other two men. Caleb swept Jax up into his arms, issuing a curt order to deliver the three to federal prison. He carried Jax to a nearby apartment he apparently kept, laying him gently on the bed. Under the drug's influence, Jax was now emitting uncontrolled mating pheromones. He begged Caleb for a suppressant. Caleb shook his head, explaining that the drug was too potent. A suppressant would only cause him more agony. Jax then pleaded with him to leave, to let him ride out the rut alone. Caleb simply stripped off his shirt. His hand moved to Jax's stomach. He whispered for Jax to just try him, promising that alpha on alpha was a different kind of thrill. Jax arched his back, sweat beading on his skin, his body a traitor to his mind. The rut lasted 7 days. For 7 days, Caleb didn't leave his side, claiming his body again and again. On the 8th morning, Jax was smoking by the window, contemplating the wreckage of his life. Caleb took the cigarette from his fingers and took a drag from the end Jax's lips had just touched. He declared himself Jax's true first, his first alpha. Jax sighed, a plume of smoke obscuring his face. The room was thick with the scent of peaches and whiskey, two pheromones that should have been at war but had instead merged, creating a sweet, intoxicating liquor that was disturbingly perfect. Caleb's hand stroked the back of his neck. He noted that the mark he'd left had already faded, and before Jax could protest, he bit down on his gland again, flooding him with his scent. The sensation was electric, a dizzying rush that left Jax breathless. Caleb told him he knew Jax liked it, that they were the same kind of deviant. In a surge of defiance, Jax tackled him, sinking his own teeth into Caleb's gland, marking him in return. Caleb grabbed a fistful of his hair, his voice a low growl of pleasure as he confessed how utterly obsessed he was. And just like that, they were together. Everyone said two alphas couldn't last, but for 3 years, Caleb's passion never waned. They were genuinely happy. Jax saved up and opened his own auto garage, proud of his work, content with his life. He had a career he loved and a partner who matched his intensity. Ethan's return was the first crack in that perfect facade. He approached Jax, his eyes red-rimmed, his gardenia pheromones filling the space between them. He asked if he still had a chance. Jax remembered their shared history, the high school crush that blossomed in college, but the spark was gone. All he felt was a quiet fondness for a person he used to know. He told Ethan gently that it was impossible. Ethan acknowledged it with a sad smile, remarking that Jax had always been the type to run headfirst into a wall. But once he turned away from it, he never looked back. He admitted he'd been a fool not to cherish what they had. Shortly after Ethan left, Caleb arrived. He wrapped his arms around Jax from behind and froze. The lingering scent of gardenias was unmistakable. He lifted Jax onto his office desk, his intentions clear. Jax protested that someone could walk in. Caleb assured him the bodyguards were posted at the door. Caleb was smiling, but Jax could feel the fury simmering beneath the surface, the rage of a territorial lion. The possessiveness of an alpha was a familiar beast. He asked what Ethan had said. Jax recounted the story, how Caleb had deliberately pursued Ethan to drive him away. Caleb admitted it without shame, arguing that if Ethan had truly loved Jax, he wouldn't have been so easily swayed. He claimed he did it all for love, daring Jax not to be angry. 3 years ago, this revelation would have sent Jax into a rage. Now it barely registered. Caleb knew him well enough to confess with such brazen arrogance. Caleb leaned down, his lips tracing a path along Jax's abdomen. He looked up, his expression mischievous, and asked if such devoted service would earn his forgiveness. Jax simply called him a little bastard and bit down hard on his gland, marking him again. It was a useless gesture between two alphas, but a satisfying one. Caleb held him tight, his body trembling with pleasure, and growled that he had finally licked that disgusting gardenia scent off him. He forbade Jax from seeing Ethan again, threatening murder. Jax told him to stop being so jealous over ancient history. As they left the garage later, planning to get dinner, 3 vans screeched to a halt, boxing them in. 20 men, their arms covered in tattoos, swarmed out, brandishing machetes. They were all betas, immune to the paralyzing effects of an S-class alpha's pheromones, which could stop a bullet midair but offered no defense against a blade up close. Jax wrestled a machete from one of them and roared at the bodyguards to get Caleb inside and lock the steel door. But Caleb was already in the fight, snapping a man's arm and bringing a blade down on another. His handsome face splattered with blood. He gave his own order, "Forget him, protect Jax." They put their backs to each other, a whirlwind of coordinated violence, holding their ground until the sirens wailed in the distance. In the hospital, Caleb's gaze tracked over every cut and bruise on Jax's body, a vein throbbing in his temple. He pulled Jax into a tight embrace, his voice strained as he asked if it hurt. Jax just tousled his hair, trying to lighten the mood with a crude joke about hospital bed antics. For once, the man who seemed to want him at all times was completely still. The embrace was enough. The official police report was laughably thin. The attackers were co-owners of a rival garage, jealous of Jax's success. It was an obvious lie, but they stuck to their story. After the attack, Caleb was plagued by nightmares. Jax would wake to find him on the balcony, chain-smoking in the cold night air. Finally, Jax couldn't stand it anymore. He joined him, wrapping his arms around Caleb's chilled frame. Caleb confessed the truth. The man behind the attack was one of his father's illegitimate sons, a fool who thought killing Caleb would clear his path to inheritance. When Jax asked what happened to him, Caleb's answer was simple. He was dead. He described his family as a viper's nest of infighting and constant threats. His position as the designated heir was a precarious one. Jax offered to help, to use his own S-class abilities to fight alongside him. Caleb refused. He said the work was dirty and he wouldn't let it touch Jax. He just needed Jax to stay by his side, to promise he would never leave. Jax agreed. Soon after, he discovered the other source of Caleb's stress. His father had delivered an ultimatum: cut ties with the Alpha and marry a proper Omega. Caleb had torn up the formal invitation to a family gala that his father had sent for Jax, telling him to ignore it. But on the day of the party, men were sent to collect Jax anyway. They didn't allow him into the main hall. Instead, they placed him in a small, isolated room with a large screen broadcasting the event live. A commotion erupted among the guests. An Omega had gone into a sudden, unexpected heat, his powerful mating pheromones overwhelming every alpha in the room. Bodyguards scrambled to escort the affected alphas out, but Caleb pushed through the crowd, heading straight for the Omega. He grabbed the young man's arm, his eyes burning with a raw, possessive desire that Jax knew all too well. It was the way Caleb looked at him in the throes of passion. The Omega, a young man named Julian, blushed, leaning into Caleb. He told Caleb their pheromone compatibility report had come back. 99%. A match that high was destiny, a biological guarantee of a deep and abiding love. He had thought it was just a business arrangement, but now he saw it as fate. Caleb fought against the pull, his jaw tight. To stay lucid, he sliced his own palm open with a sharp edge of his cufflink. He knocked out a guard who tried to stop him and staggered towards the exit. Jax threw his door open just as Caleb stumbled out, and they collided. Caleb pinned him against the doorframe, kissing him desperately, saying he knew Jax was there, that he could smell his peach pheromones. He insisted that only Jax could help him through his rut. Jax bandaged his hand and tried, but he quickly discovered a horrifying truth. No matter what he did, Caleb's body wouldn't respond. It craved Julian's rose-scented pheromones with a desperate, primal need. Jax was like ash in his mouth. For the first time, Caleb's whiskey pheromones weren't just clashing with his peach scent. They were violently rejecting it. For 10 days, Jax stayed in that room while Caleb's body warred with his mind. When the rut finally ended, Caleb wrapped Jax in his coat and carried him out. His father, Arthur Beaumont, was waiting, seated in a wheelchair, his body frail. He told Caleb that he must now understand. Under the influence of Julian's pheromones, this alpha could no longer satisfy him. He could keep Jax as a mistress if he wished. Caleb cut him off. He would not marry Julian. He declared that Jax was his partner, kissed Jax's forehead, and strode away. Beaumont's voice followed them, a venomous whisper, questioning how long Caleb could stay with someone who no longer held any sexual value for him. They didn't kill Jax because a living failure was a more potent weapon than a dead martyr. They believed in the absolute power of pheromones and were content to wait for Caleb to inevitably discard him. The truth was, Caleb couldn't just leave. Jax was an orphan, his only tie to Caleb. But Caleb had allies who depended on him, a mother and a younger sister to protect. His father and his enemies would never let him walk away. He was trapped by his destiny. Caleb became consumed by work, driven to usurp his father and seize control of the family empire. He surrounded Jax with his most trusted bodyguards. 2 months passed without any intimacy between them. Jax's own body ached with desire, but Caleb couldn't. His glands, having been exposed to Julian's scent, were now in a state of civil war with Jax's. The exposure had created a severe physiological revulsion. When Jax's own rut approached, he reached for a suppressant, but Caleb snatched it away, throwing it in the trash. He insisted Jax didn't need it while he was around. When Jax pointed out the obvious problem, that Caleb couldn't perform, a flicker of anger crossed Caleb's face. He tossed Jax onto the bed, a dangerous smile playing on his lips, promising to show him something wild. They made it through Jax's rut, and for a short time it felt like things were back to normal. Then, one day, Jax went to meet Caleb after work and found Julian with him. Caleb explained it was unavoidable. Their families had numerous joint business ventures. Julian offered Jax a handshake, a model of decorum, and invited him to join them for a dinner with partners. Jax accepted. At dinner, Caleb's hand never left the small of Jax's back. He kept murmuring for him to eat more, that he'd gotten too thin. Julian proposed a toast to Jax. The wine tasted of roses, a strange echo of Julian's pheromones. Julian asked how he liked it. Jax's reply was cool. He still preferred peach-flavored spirits. Caleb, his face grim, poured out the rest of his own wine. He declared that his taste, like Jax's, was unchanging. He found the combination of roses and wine discordant. His pheromones told a different story. The desire was a palpable thing, a beast straining at its leash. He dragged Jax from the restaurant and back to the car, where the scent of whiskey instantly intensified as another rut hit him. He begged Jax for help. Jax leaned over him, but it was useless. Without Julian's rose scent as a catalyst, Caleb's body refused to cooperate. He had won Jax over with his raw, untamed passion, the excitement he offered. Now, the person who could provide that thrill was Julian. With a snarl of frustration, Caleb pulled out a suppressant and jabbed it into his own gland. The silence in the car was thick with their shared humiliation. He claimed to have a team of experts working on a drug to block high-match dependency, but Jax knew that was a decades-old fantasy that had never materialized. Not long after, Jax ran into Andy, the Omega who had drugged him years ago. He should have been in federal prison. The moment Andy saw him, he tried to bolt. Jax pinned him with a wave of his pheromones, and Andy dropped to his knees, begging for mercy. Jax kept the pressure on, a form of torture more potent than any physical blow, until Andy broke. He confessed that Caleb had ordered him to do it. As proof, Andy produced a recording. On it, Caleb could be heard asking if the drug was safe. Andy assured him it was. Then, a friend's voice asked Caleb why he was so obsessed with an alpha. Caleb's reply was chillingly casual. He said he wouldn't waste too much time on him, that he'd dump him after he'd had his fun. The world tilted on its axis. He asked Andy why he had the recording. It turned out Caleb hadn't paid him what he promised. Jax confronted Caleb with the recording. Faced with the evidence, Caleb couldn't deny it. Enraged, he unleashed his pheromones on Andy, knocking the Omega unconscious. Then Jax released his own. There was no harmony now, only suppression and conflict. He called Caleb despicable. Caleb simply stood there, taking the full force of Jax's phenomenal assault. Jax accused him of being tired of him after 3 years. Caleb insisted it was just talk, just boasting to his friends. Jax wasn't listening. He said that Caleb's actions made him question everything, made him feel sick. This finally broke Caleb's composure. He demanded to know why Jax was so fixated on the past, accusing him of still blaming him for the end of his relationship with Ethan. He shouted that it didn't matter how they started. What mattered was the 3 years he had devoted to Jax, and he couldn't understand why Jax would doubt his sincerity now. He looked at Jax, his expression cold and impatient, and said he was too busy to argue. Jax stared, stunned by the stranger in front of him. With his heart breaking, he watched as Caleb, his eyes red, pressed forward and tried to kiss him. Less than 10 seconds in, Caleb tore himself away, stumbled to a trash can, and retched violently. The longer he was exposed to Julian, the more severe his physical rejection of Jax became. That was the final blow. Jax told him to stop deceiving himself. It was over. At that moment, they were ambushed again. 100 assassins descended upon them. They fell back into their old rhythm, fighting back to back, a seamless unit of destruction. They were about to break through when Jax caught the scent of roses. Julian was nearby, sending out a pheromonal distress signal. Even with a low match rating, Jax felt an instinctual urge to protect him. For Caleb, whose match was 99%, the pull was irresistible. He broke formation, rushing to Julian's side to shield him. Jax's back was suddenly exposed. A blade bit deep into his flesh. Then another. He was thrown to the ground. He heard Caleb scream his name, a sound of pure terror. Fighting through the agony, Jax battled on. Caleb, protecting Julian, fought with a desperate ferocity. After what felt like an eternity, the last attacker fell. Jax swayed on his feet, his hands slick with his own blood as he clutched his stomach. Caleb shoved Julian aside and ran to him, catching him as he collapsed. He pulled Jax into his arms, tears streaming down his face, promising it would be okay, begging him not to sleep. Jax was in the ICU for 3 days. When he woke, Caleb was by his side, his face a haggard mask of sleeplessness, his eyes threaded with red. He told Jax the details. 17 separate wounds with 40 stitches needed to close the gash on his abdomen. Jax's voice was flat. He said that he had trusted Caleb with his back, and Caleb had left his post. He understood it was instinct, the unbreakable bond of pheromones, but understanding didn't erase the betrayal. He told Caleb they were done. Caleb refused, clinging to him, weeping, insisting that he was human, not a slave to his biology, that he loved only Jax. He tried to kiss him, but their pheromones went to war again. The conflict so violent it sent a wave of pain through Jax's weakened body. Caleb recoiled as if burned. While Jax recovered, the Beaumont Empire imploded. Arthur Beaumont died suddenly. Caleb's uncles made their move, but Caleb was faster and more ruthless. He dismantled their power, consolidated his own, and became the undisputed head of the family. He terminated all business with Julian's family. A month after being discharged, Jax was back at his garage when Julian appeared, wrinkling his nose at the smell of motor oil. He couldn't understand what Caleb saw in a common mechanic. He told Jax not to get comfortable, that a 99% match was a bond for life. Caleb would eventually come back to him. Jax informed him that he didn't have to wait. He had already decided to leave. Julian's eyes lit up with triumphant joy. This time, Jax wasn't going to run into the wall. He was going to be the one who walked away first. He slipped past his bodyguards and left New York behind, abandoning everything. He heard rumors that the new head of the Beaumont family had gone mad, searching the world for his lost partner. Jax opened a new garage in Seattle. Life was simple. One afternoon, while working under a car, he called out for a wrench. A hand passed it to him, and with it came a familiar scent. It was Ethan smiling down at him. He'd remembered Jax saying he liked Seattle and had come on a hunch, checking every new garage that had opened in the last 6 months. They were laughing when a young Omega, Leo, came to pick up his car. He shyly gave Jax a box of homemade cookies. After he'd hurried away, blushing, Ethan remarked that the kid had a crush on him. Jax invited Ethan to dinner. They reminisced about their college days. As they parted, Ethan hugged him, saying he would wait for him. Jax gently disentangled himself, telling him not to. Later that night, a powerful, commanding pheromone signature washed over the street, aimed directly at Ethan. Jax pushed Ethan behind him, releasing his own challenging scent, and saw Caleb standing in the shadows. He looked different. His pheromones smelled of sake now, not whiskey, and his S-class power felt diminished, muted. Caleb closed the distance and pulled Jax into his arms. He asked if he'd had his fill of saying goodbye. After Ethan left, Jax looked up at Caleb, who cradled his face, his eyes welling with tears. He asked, his voice breaking, what the proper procedure was for winning back an estranged husband. He had no experience. Jax asked if the antipheromone drug had finally been developed. Caleb said no. Confused, Jax reached for his neck, his fingers tracing the ruined landscape of Caleb's scent gland. It was a mass of overlapping scars, as if it had been clawed at repeatedly. When he asked how it happened, Caleb's voice was small. He said he'd done it to himself after Jax left. He kissed Jax, whispering, "What good is a gland that can't even recognize its own mate?" The irreversible damage, the self-inflicted agony he must have endured, tore through Jax's defenses. He called him a stupid bastard. Caleb looked at him with wounded eyes, saying that Jax could live well without him, but he couldn't even eat. He was the one who loved more. Jax pulled him into his office and onto the table. Caleb's jealousy flared as he listed Jax's recent transgressions. Dinner with the ex, the new Omega admirer. He declared that Jax was on probation, but punishment came first. As he lifted Jax's shirt, Jax glanced nervously at the unlocked door. Caleb's voice was a low growl when he reminded Jax that his match with Julian was nothing, that their peach-flavored sake was the only perfect blend. Jax asked him what would happen if he met another high-match Omega, if his body betrayed Caleb again. Caleb's eyes turned dark. He said in that case he would lock Jax away and take him by force. And if he himself was ever swayed by another, he would finish the job and destroy his glands completely, even if it meant becoming a beta. The answer was insane, possessive, and exactly what Jax needed to hear. He smiled and pulled Caleb onto his lap. He told him that if it ever happened again, he wouldn't have to destroy his own glands. Jax would lock him up and fuck him to death. A look of feverish anticipation lit Caleb's eyes. He told Jax to be cruel, to show no mercy. Jax kissed him, a deep, bruising kiss. They were both predators born for each other. He made Caleb wait 2 weeks before agreeing to return to New York with him. The day they got back, fate dealt its hand. Jax met an Omega with a 90% pheromonal match. The connection was instantaneous, a jolt of pure electricity that made him want to claim the man on the spot. Suddenly, the sight of Caleb was irritating, an obstacle. But his mind, his soul screamed that it loved Caleb. His body and spirit were at war. Caleb, seeing the struggle, went wild with jealousy. He dragged Jax home and locked him in their room. He tried to kiss him and Jax threw up. The look of profound hurt on Caleb's face mirrored what Jax himself had felt. He finally understood. Gritting his teeth, Jax pulled Caleb onto the bed. He declared that they would show their pheromones who was master. A renewed fire lit in Caleb's eyes. He kissed Jax again, and this time they fought through the revulsion. The peach pheromones battled the sake. Then slowly, painstakingly, they began to merge, creating their unique, sweet, intoxicating blend. Caleb held him, triumphant, claiming he had tamed Jax's pheromones, that they would now remember who their true master was. Jax, draped over Caleb's sweat-slicked body, knew it wasn't about mastery. He loved him. Without that love, biology would have won. Caleb, it seemed, agreed and proceeded to prove it for 7 straight days, kissing every scar on Jax's body like a devout worshiper at an altar, forging a bond that no instinct could ever break.